What's happening, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. And joining me once again on this Friday is the one and only Mike Wahle, former Packers great offensive guard in a variety of other O-line positions that he played in his career. Mike, how the heck are you doing? Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again. I'm doing great and excited to talk about this last game.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton to get into. We've kind of been digging into a little bit all week, but one of the things that I want to, of course, ask you right away is there were definitely some breakdowns in protection on the offensive line. And certainly there's times as well when you bring one more, person from a defensive standpoint that you just have to get rid of the football. But I really wanted to hear your kind of side of things as you were watching this Packers offensive line trying to protect against these Steve Spagnuolo blitzes. You had a really interesting observation that I think our listeners are going to enjoy, but I would love to hear your thoughts on the protection from this past week.
Well, listen, I think it's tough because when you have a new quarterback or a quarterback who doesn't have a lot of experience, like Jordan Love in the backfield, you sometimes just miss opportunities. And we talked about it before. In the first 20 plays, they've actually only pressured twice. One was on the quick screen that he overthrew to, I believe, who was that on the flat?
It was a receiver outside, right? Yeah. And
yeah. And then the second one, it was on the screen with the eggshell across, and he connected the ball to Devontae. Yep. So they really weren't pressuring early because they didn't need to. I think that the plan looked like they were trying to run they're going to dial some things up on third down. They started to do that later in the game. What happens is when you have a young quarterback, and if you can kind of just picture this in your mind, but so you got a single receiver side with Devontae to the right, and you have a trip side to the left. They're showing pressure. Tyrann Mathieu walking down from that safety position, kind of looking like he's in cover 2 or quarters, but then he's walking down. If Aaron Rodgers sees that over to his right side, he's going to give Devontae like, it's on. We're going. Yeah. We're not just going to run like a dig route or a slant or something, because they're actually playing inside leverage on him. Like everything's set up for success, right? He doesn't see that. He doesn't even see the blitz coming. He's looking over to the left. He's looking at the 3 receiver side, and all of a sudden the guy's in his face. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Right. So from a blitz standpoint, that's why people love to blitz young quarterbacks, because they usually just don't see it coming. They're dialed, especially when they're locked in on like what their read progression is, right? Or we're going to the 3 side or the 1 side. You know, if we picked a man or his own, kind of beater on each side of the field. Like a lot of teams, if they're on like a 2x2, they're gonna have a man side and a zone side. He's already made his decision. Well, if the blitz is coming from the other side, you might have a problem. More often than not, when you saw the breakdown in protection, it's not really the blitz. It's that single guard or that single tackle who doesn't have help that is now getting beat quickly off the ball, takes a bad set, et cetera, et cetera. So listen, the Chiefs are going to be, from a defensive line perspective, now they have Melvin Ingram, because you got to remember they're missing D Ford.
Right.
He's had back issues. He's kind of been in and out. But when you have Melvin Ingram in the game, he on the first pass play of the game, he bowled Billy back and kind of made Jordan think about that first throw. Not the play action pass, the first drop back pass, excuse me. Not the first keep pass, but the first drop back pass. And now you have that. You have Frank Crock on the other side, and you can move Chris Jones, who is a dominant defensive tackle, not a dominant defensive end where they've been playing him, but he is a dominant defensive tackle. So you find a dominant defensive tackle inside who's a bully, like Chris Jones is a bully. I said this before on another show, on another podcast. Like, he found a guy he could bully. He could bully Royce a little bit. He got a little bit bullied this week, and the problem with getting bullied is their whole team feeds off it. And now Chris Jones, actually now he goes, okay, wait a second, I'm bullying him. Let me just take it down to Patrick, and I'll have my way with the center a couple times, right? And 91 starts playing better, 90 starts playing better, and it's just kind of it turns into an avalanche a little bit. So I don't think the Packers did a bad job necessarily. Like, if you connect on a couple of those routes, if you adjust your routes, there's a couple of deep plays where they got blitzed and like guys are running wide open down the field.
Yep.
And he's just not seeing it because he's seeing the blitz and seeing the rush, stepping up too fast, happy feet. So it's kind of listen, it's never one person and it's never one thing, but this is one of those, certainly you look back and like, there's a couple plays there where if this is Aaron Rodgers at the helm, you got 21 points there for sure.
Yeah, and obviously teams don't play Aaron Rodgers like that for that very reason. If Aaron's in there, they're not seeing that much pressure in a lot of those plays. Now, you mentioned obviously there was the deep ball to Devontae that he missed on. And again, there was pressure on him immediately. There was another play where MVS got wide open deep. And again, he's just not seeing that, as you kind of mentioned.
That was that deep post, right?
Yep, exactly.
Oh, that was a big play. He missed the rush. It's again, that's looking at the rush, not looking at the play.
Yep, absolutely. So those are things, again, that you sort of expect from a young quarterback from time to time, and then maybe not see some of those things. But we also saw at times, and correct, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this. Mm-hmm. It did feel like on a few different occasions, especially with Devontae on the outside, that, as you mentioned, you've got a single man Devontae on one side, safety's creeping down. It's one-on-one Devontae Adams. That's go time. That's showtime. That's money time. That's exactly what you want. And I appreciated the fact that Jordan, on a few different occasions, did throw to Devontae one-on-one. One was the back shoulder where they weren't on the same page. Another was the interception, the Devontae got one hand on it, ended up in the interception. Another one he threw it was the one we were talking about where he threw it out of bounds when Devontae had him beat easy down the sideline. And again, immediate pressure on that play as well. So that normally is your go-to, your money play. And if, Matt LaFleur, I'm sure, is saying, similar as to what you're saying, okay, if they're going to do one-on-one on Devontae Adams, but Jordan throughout the course of that game either couldn't hit that, the accuracy was a little bit off, didn't see it at times. At what point does Matt have to change and say, okay, even though this should be our money thing, it's not, and we continue to get burned by it, we need to do something else? Or did you feel like they did do other things and Jordan just couldn't kind of make those adjustments?
Well, I think we averaged like 5 yards a carry rushing the ball. So we're having success there. A lot of the play action stuff and the keep passes was open. The big thing, if you start looking at the game, like what didn't work? Well, screens didn't work very well after maybe the first 2 series. There's a couple problems there.
Yep.
And then really they're just the connections with some of these deeper routes. Like you can't run long progression routes with a guy who's got happy feet, and a rookie or a young quarterback, a quarterback who hasn't played a lot of snaps, they're more likely than not going to have happy feet. So you just have to kind of bake that in. But I think the problem with a lot of what you see, and we know that Aaron Rodgers changes plays at the line of scrimmage. He has kind of one-on-one conversations with certain receivers, change their routes. Like, for example, Devontae had heavy inside leverage on a play where the route combination calls for him to run a slant. It's like he's heavy inside leverage with no over the top help. Well, what does Aaron do there? Probably gives him the zipper look and he's out, right? But if you don't have that, like it really just goes to show you, it's not that Matt LaFleur did anything different or poorly. It just goes to show you how special an MVP quarterback is and how much of an impact he can have on a game, not just with his accuracy, but also what he's doing pre-snap.
Yeah, that's kind of been my thing all week, is that when Packer fans have had 3 decades of Favre and Rodgers, there's so many things that you can just take for granted. The pre-snap stuff, checks at the line, making sure everyone's protecting correctly, making sure everyone's lined up correctly, like the cadence, all of that stuff, silent count, not walking up and, lifting your leg and the ball gets snapped at your feet, like just those sort of things that you take for granted for literally 3 decades. When you don't have those type of players in there and somebody's making their first career start, you can't take all of that stuff for granted, and you end up with mistakes and errors in an offense that looks very disjointed. And and that's just why quarterback is so insanely important. And it's so much more than just, 3-step dropping out and accuracy and footwork. It's just an insane position that so much goes into it.
Yeah. Being able to be a real coach on the field, or somebody who can adjust the plays for what they see from the defense, like that is such a unheralded skill.
Yep.
And I remember, I just remember going into like Bucks games, and, as soon as Lynch kind of starts sniffing down, like Brett's calling out the blitzes already and making those adjustments and calling these. And it puts you mind at ease as a teammate, because now we all know I think our offensive line did a really nice job of picking those signals up anyways. We were very kind of well-versed in that.
Right.
But when your quarterback is relaying that information to the entire team, there's just a new level of confidence, because like, oh, I know exactly what they're going to do. I feel confident about it. I know where to go on these. I mean, you see a couple of guys running free up the middle of this last week. It's just because like the linebacker walks down the A gap. Patrick kind of puts a hand on the nose tackle. He goes to the right. He comes up on the nose on the linebacker thinking he's going to blitz. He's not blitzing. The nose tackle's running free now. I mean, it turns into kind of Keystone Cops.
Yep.
And a big part of that is because the quarterback's not there saying, no, we're going backside definitively. I've got him, or Dylan's got him, or Aaron Jones has him, or there's a sense of confidence that comes with that command voice in the backfield telling you exactly what's about to happen.
I get my dominant offensive lines from Green Bay's history mixed up. Was it Chad, you, Mike, Marco, Mark?
Yep.
All right. Yeah. So as you mentioned, that's a really darn good group of offensive linemen. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, John Lynch is coming down in the box. And I'm sure like all five of you are probably seeing that same thing and able to make those checks in your mind. But I'm sure there's an insane more level of confidence when Brett confirms it behind you, so that not only do you know that he knows, but now you know that Mike knows and Chad knows and that everyone around you, so that everyone's actually on the same page. So even if maybe 99 times out of 100, all five of you would have done the same thing and seen the same thing, just having that confirmation that, okay, we're all on the same page has to go a long way for your confidence in knowing how that play is going to develop.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like for us, it's just having that confidence that knowing like AG, Tony Fisher, Najee, those guys in the backfield know exactly what's about to happen. Right. For example, they're bringing down John, they're running the Wolf Blitz, the Will Strong safety blitz or Will Weak safety blitz. Or if he's doing a check to drive her out on at the X receiver to make a route change because we see something, we know that safety's not going to be over the top anymore. So we have these opportunities. Like those are the things in dynamic offenses that make you great. That takes you from kind of pedestrian or maybe even efficient to special, to a top three group in the league. And that's kind of what the power of Aaron Rodgers. It's funny. I remember we were playing Detroit one year and we're beating the brakes off him at home. One of the D tackles said something to us to the effect like, you guys aren't any good if Brett's not here, right? And we just kind of all looked around because we thought we were, everyone thinks they're pretty good, and
right.
This whole thing, and we kind of sat there and we were laughing, and our only response was, "Well, he's here," like, too bad for you, you know what I mean? Because all of us, the teams that are like pedestrian right now and have awful quarterbacks, you go throwing Aaron Rodgers on any one of those teams, they're playing for their division title. It's just how it is.
Yeah, I've said for a long time, when you have Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre as your starting quarterback, you're already in the playoffs. As long as they stay healthy through the course of the year, you're basically in the playoffs to begin with. And now it's just figuring out seeding and how well you're playing towards the end of the year. But you've got a puncher's chance at a Super Bowl every year, and almost no matter what. And I agree with you. I think if you I've always said I would love to see Aaron Rodgers on that 0-16 Detroit Lions team, just like, prime Aaron Rodgers, 0-16 Detroit Lions, just how far could he get that team to compete? Same with Tom Brady, same thing. Like, I would love to see, like, those thought experiments always go through my mind.
Yeah, they would. I mean, certainly, I don't know how many games he went. I don't know if they go to the playoffs. I don't know if they go to the second round or whatever. But it does kind of point, like, this situation does kind of point to, because you got to remember the Chiefs defense was awful. Right, going into that game, they're awful.
Big time,
right?
Yep.
And offensively, they haven't been doing well. I mean, our defense did exactly what we expected them to do against the offense that is struggling like that.
Yep.
And so it kind of does point to when Aaron Rodgers is like, "Hey, where have my weapons been for the last 8 years?" Or like, "Where's the offensive creativity been during the end of the McCarthy era?" Like all these things, and then you see games like this, you're like, "Oh, I kind of know what you mean. I kind of get it," right? Like, because he just turns good players into great players, and that's what a force multiplier does. And there's probably 8 of them in the league, and he's one of them.
Yeah, he is, and that's why they haven't exactly wanted to give up on him and trade him in the offseason. So many different things that we could go into if we wanted to, but we're not going to. So we obviously covered Jordan a lot. Any other observations that you had from Jordan? Are you any more concerned, less concerned, like any, just kind of overarching thoughts after watching that game?
Well, I mean, if this was, and again, full disclosure, I don't watch practices. I really do not enjoy preseason games. So if like this was an audition to see if in 2022, Aaron Rodgers, we could say goodbye and we could bring Jordan Love in, and with this caliber team in 2022 to say that we're going to give the reins over to that. Is he a championship winning quarterback? Is he are we a playoff team? Are we a division? I would probably go back and say, Aaron, I feel like we've just moved all the chips over to his side of the table, and he can go, I'm going to stay here as long as I want. I'm going to do it. all the power has to be in Aaron's hands right now, because not that he was awful, but he did not present himself to be championship caliber at this point. And I don't think he's going to get any more reps this year.
Yeah, I think Green Bay is going to have obviously a really serious decision this offseason. And obviously Aaron's going to play a part in that as well. But do you want to try to reload again with Aaron Rodgers? Obviously, the salary cap is going to be a nightmare situation if they do go that route, but continue to borrow from the future and try to keep this window open. Or if you go Jordan, to me, like you almost need to go scorched earth and do full rebuild and know that, all right, you're not going to be competing for a championship in the near future. This is going to be a rebuild and a relaunch and kind of see what you can do with it. But my biggest concern is that you go halfway with either of those things, where you bring Aaron back, but you keep Jordan around and you try to sort of do some rebuilding because the salary cap's not like you do that and you're just kind of undercutting the last years of Aaron's career. And then or vice versa, you go to Jordan, but try to keep everything else around him. And then now you've got this team that is really good around him, but he's just not ready to compete at that level. And you end up in no man's land. I almost feel like you have to rip the Band-Aid or go all in, and anything in between almost becomes the worst case scenario. But Brian Gutekunst has a ton of decisions ahead of him.
Yeah, I think, I always try to look at it from the player's perspective. If I'm a 7 to 8 year guy, I mean, maybe Bakhtiari is a good guy to kind of look at.
Yeah.
And he's got some great years left for sure, but his years probably look a lot different. His pathway to a Super Bowl looks a lot different with Jordan Love. Mercedes Lewis, who doesn't have a lot of years left, right? But you have those opportunities. You just kind of look at those guys and what their window looks like when you get rid of that player. It doesn't, like, from their standpoint, they got to be, I would just be heartbroken, I guess, or very, very frustrated as a player, because now you pretty much know you don't have a chance to win the chip. And I think for many of those players, that is got to be a huge source of motivation to be in Green Bay, to have that opportunity to play with Aaron, all those things that come with it. So I see it kind of from both sides. It would be very difficult. I think you're absolutely right. There's no way to not get rid of Aaron and keep everybody else. I mean, financially, it doesn't make sense, but just, it's almost like you guys have been good soldiers for us. We're going to do you a solid now and be gone. Yeah. And
I mean, Devontae, I think a part of the reason he hasn't signed an extension yet, I think part is money, but I think part is he probably wants to see what happens in this offseason and is Aaron back, and can you afford both Aaron and Devontae and all those sort of things. So tons of things that we have to look forward to as the offseason eventually progresses. But as we sit going into week 10, we still have a ton of football, obviously, on the field to discuss. The defense was, as you mentioned, exactly what you wanted to see against a oddly struggling Kansas City offense. I thought they held up really well for the most part against Kyler Murray and that Arizona offense as well. Some touchdowns late that you would have probably liked to have seen them step up a little bit more too. But overall, it seems like they're absolutely trending in the right direction. Have you seen anything different from this defense? Is this just the teams that they're playing? Is this just, how do you evaluate this defense over the course of the past few weeks?
They just seem to be, it's trending upwards, and you're going to have, you just want higher highs and higher lows. It's like a good stock, man. You just want higher highs and higher lows. I think that a couple people have stepped up. Rashawn Gary's continuing to improve. He has a go-to move now. You saw it in the beginning of the third quarter. He planted that right hand inside on the stab on the left shoulder pad of the right tackle. He did it twice. He got the sack on the second play. That's a go-to move. That's a move that you're going to be able to work everything else off of. It's the speed to power and he created a rush angle off the snap. It's going to be very difficult to block. So you have that. Kenny Clark's obviously been playing at a high level. I know he came out after the screenplay.
That's what I thought
he actually initially hurt his back. Dean Lowry, he didn't really show up this week, but the last couple of weeks he's been playing really well. Obviously, Campbell's had he's been phenomenal since he got here. But for me, the secondary, you talk about Savage and Amos, they had great games. I think Savage really stood out in this game. One guy that I've kind of given some credit to this week is Kevin King. Has had a tough history in the last couple of years in Green Bay, and the beginning of this year wasn't any different. I thought the last 2 weeks, I think he's played really well. He's not making the mistakes that kind of got him in trouble in last season. And he's a very, very willing tackler. He's a physical player. And so now you look at our defense moving forward, J.R. Gowder coming back, Z Smith coming back, and you're like, man, we actually have the ability to be a top 10. And a top 10 defense with Aaron Rodgers is, to me, that's the best you can ask for, really,
Yeah.
right? You might have three cornerbacks that are game for it. Stokes comes back. I know he was injured this week, but Jerry comes back, and then obviously Kevin King's game for it now. Like, it's actually a game changer. Like, that's one of the most important positions you can have, is that third corner, that slot corner. So if we can figure out a way to get all three of those guys in the game, they're playing at a high level, and then you bring back Z Smith. Preston Smith has kind of not reverted back to the mean, but he was I think a top name grab early in the season. Not a lot of action here, but he still has the ability to long run. He has the ability to keep people off balance. He's good in the run game. He'll probably have a couple games where you kind of see the flashing of getting some sacks back. But, between Kenny Clark and Rashad Gary up front, like, Rashad Gary's he's that kid just because of his build that you can just see, like, he could pack on another 10 pounds and he could be, he's one of those kids that you just go, hey, listen, man, you have the talent to be like a 6-time All-Pro.
Yep.
Do you want to or not? Because it's like this far away, man. It's really this far away. Just be more consistent in what you're doing. Don't waste pass rushes with trying to go upfield. Like, just do your thing. Cam Wake had the best statement, man. He used to line up a very specific way. He had a very specific move, and he was like, listen, I'm going to win like 7 times a game. If you're going to pass rush 35 times, I'm going to win 7, or pass pro 35 times. I'm going to win 7. It just depends if the quarterback gets rid of the ball or not. It's math.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how I feel like he can be that guy if he just really refines this move. So.
No, I agree. I think that's the last step, right? Is just refinement on the technique, because the motor's there, the hustle's there, the speed's there, the power's there. He's got everything you want. And it's just figuring out, all right, now, and really going into this season. And as you perfectly mentioned, I didn't think he had that go-to move. Now he's got a go-to move. All right, now what can you do off of it? Can you spin? Can you hump? Can you do something else that's going to bring him up to that next level? I love the fact that it's almost been layered every single year, the improvement. And I feel like, as you mentioned, he's maybe one step away from really reaching that upper echelon. And he's starting to impact the game every single week more consistently. And I just, like you mentioned, Preston too, right? Like, if all of a sudden Z comes back, and I don't know that he's going to be like he was 2 years ago, but he still is going to, if he comes back, you'd still expect him to be a really good edge rusher. If Z and Gary are your 1 and 2 with Clark inside, and then Preston becomes like your number 3 option, and then Whitney Merciless is your 4th. And like, as you mentioned, Dean Lowry's been playing much better. Like, now that entire front looks so much better. Chris Barnes steps up this past week. Devondre Campbell's been playing well. You mentioned the corners, Savage and Amos. Like, there's not a ton of holes on that defense. And there's a lot of fun players who are trending in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. And just to go back to Gary again, like, there's one thing that helps a defense more than anything else, and it's that game plan player, that player that the other team has to really focus on.
Yep.
And, there's a couple of things that he has to improve on from a technical standpoint. Like, his get off can be better. He's not particularly good when he's rushing from his right side. That hand placement needs to be a little more accurate. There's things, and then you start making these decisions based on the way that guy sets. You change it up a little bit for every specific player you play against. But if he does that, he can become what I call a game plan defensive player. And all of a sudden, like, your whole offense changes when you got a game plan against a lineman. Like, the whole thing changes up, right? Because now you got to bring extra guys over. You have to chip with tight ends. You have to keep in tight ends. You have to chip with backs. Your route combinations change. Everything changes, and it frees up your other players. So, and hopefully, I don't know if we're there this year, but it's coming soon. If he keeps working, it's coming soon.
No, it certainly is. He's a really exciting player, and I'm incredibly excited to see where that ceiling ends up with him. I got to ask you. So obviously Rodgers is looking to come back this week and play after a 10-day absence. He's a veteran. He doesn't need a ton of practice time. He doesn't probably need a ton of reps, but how does that affect him being out for that long? How does that affect the rest of the team? Obviously, Jordan's going to have to take the number 1 reps in practice, which isn't exactly the same as practicing with a player like Aaron. So do you expect any lag with the offense, or is that just going to be able to be, basically like riding a bike, and Rodgers will come back and it'll be totally fine?
I think it's helpful that Seattle's defense isn't very good. First off, I know that they'll probably have a couple like mental days. Like, I think Matt LaFleur is into like mental days as far as, practice speed.
For sure.
So that'll probably, so he can probably virtually sit into meetings and have discussions, things like that. With the receivers that he has, I think maybe because MBS was out for a while, but if you think about Devontae, you think about Lazard, Mercedes Lewis is a consummate pro. Those guys are going to, the guys in the backfield, or A.J. Dillon seems to be able to catch everything now.
For sure.
And obviously Aaron Jones is phenomenal. So I don't think it creates much of a hiccup just because it's been in place for so long. I think honestly, it's probably the best thing Jordan Love could have is another week of kind of running the ones, being comfortable in his own skin, working on his footwork, etc., and then handing the reins over to the MVP.
Yeah, no, not a bad option at all. And that's kind of how I viewed it, whereas you prepare for Jordan and prepare if that's the situation that's needed. But assuming Aaron's ready to go, you probably go through walkthroughs on Saturday with Aaron, and everyone's probably raring to go on Sunday and have him back calling plays and obviously calling the shots at the line of scrimmage. We're at the point right now, and as we're recording this, Odell Beckham has not made a decision yet. And it sounds like that may be not until next week that he makes a decision based on the most current reports. Not necessarily, and obviously feel free to weigh in on how you feel like OBJ would fit with the Packers if you'd like, but more wanted to ask you, not sure if you've ever had a player kind of come in mid-season that would obviously kind of move the needle a little bit. Does that boost morale for a team? Does that help? Is that a potential locker room issue? Like how is that viewed in the locker room when a team acquires a player, potentially the caliber of like an Odell Beckham?
Well, I think with a guy like Odell Beckham, because he has been pretty divisive in the places that he's traveled. There's two camps, and everywhere he's gone, it's as far as do we love him or do we not want him here? And there's the talent. I always look at, for me, when you think about the Aaron Rodgers led Packers and how we operate now, we're not as efficient as we used to be. We've proven that we can be efficient. It's just kind of figuring out your offense and your personnel and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And that's just kind of sometimes happens over a longer period of time than it has in years past. But does Odell Beckham go wherever he goes, except for really the New England Patriots. And as long as Michael Thomas is out, maybe the Saints, he's not alpha dog anymore. Like He's not walking in here and Devontae Adams is like all of a sudden bowing down. He's going to get his numbers, but are you satisfied that he is not going to act up if his numbers aren't what he wants? And that would be the question I ask. And if I was a player, if I'm a personnel guy, if I'm the head coach, as a player, you're excited about the talent. You think that you have a locker room that can that he's going to have to conform to in some form or fashion. He doesn't have to assimilate, but he does have to conform to this is how we do business. This is who's in charge. This is the lead dog, blah, 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 all of those things. You have to be able and willing and prove that you're willing to be part of the team. You just don't need to be, you're not just a hired gun that really doesn't care about anyone in this locker room. I think that's where a lot of people get thrown off. And I don't know if he's like that or not. I seriously doubt he's like that. He seems to be very charismatic, and people seem to, as far as kind of off the field, not on the field antics, but just off the field, people seem to really enjoy being around him. So, for me, I don't know net if it's a positive or negative, just given what we have already. Like I feel really good if I'm the Green Bay Packers about my offensive weapons. Honestly,
I agree.
I just don't know if and the other problem is Tanyan's hurt, but he was and so now you have Degora and Daphne, and they're a little bit slow on the pickup this last game. I think they played much better the week before. Degora in particular, he made some very, very bad errors in the run game.
He really
just mental errors, missing guys. Daphne missed a couple guys, just bad route, and they'll get better. Like you have Mercedes Lewis in that room, they'll get better. But you just start thinking Lazard's been pretty serviceable as a blocking wide receiver, being able to do it inside and out. He's made big plays in the passing game. So you just kind of look at it are we bringing in somebody who can fill the role that we have set out for that position? Because, you keep hearing about OBJ might be he's not a system player. He's a star player that needs to get fed and all this stuff. It's like, I just don't know if that's the modus operandi right now with the weapons that we already have.
No, I agree. That's really where I've been with everything as well. The one thing that maybe slightly changed my mind was Devontae in his press conference talking yesterday about talking to OBJ and being excited and hopeful that he was going to, and then to me, if Devontae signs off on it and he's like, yeah, I want this guy in, other side of the field, and they're gonna have to play us different. And I know sometimes players don't always make the best GMs, but when he kind of signed off on that and felt like there was enough, balls to go around and everything, that slightly changed my mind a little bit. But I do think that there's going to have to be questions. To me, it's if he wants to play, at the minimum, and Green Bay's comfortable with that and they feel like they can fit him in. But overall, Mike, I totally agree with you, where to me, this offense is already struggling to kind of figure out, targets for everyone. Obviously, Devontae gets fed a ton. I still feel like AJ and Aaron Jones could both use the ball a little bit more. And MVS and Lazard and Randall Cobb are still struggling to get targets. The tight ends are going to get a target every now and again, but there's a lot of mouths to feed already. And adding somebody like Odell Beckham, even if he gets 5 targets a game, like that's either taking from potentially Jones or Dillon or Adams. And, we'll see. But I do think it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. And again, when you think about you think about Lazard and MVS maybe in particular, and Dillon to some extent, right? Like Jones and Devontae Adams are bona fide stars in this league, and they're veterans. They know it. Those other kids are kind of still figuring it out.
Right.
Figuring out their way in the world. And they've had the absolute best place to learn. When you bring in that caliber guy, you're shutting off their development too. Like it's not I know everyone's like, well, you got to go all in this year because Aaron and this and that. It's like, well, honestly, if Goody's thinking about his long-term prospects, does it make more sense you're already doing well? Does it make more sense to kind of turn that siphon off as far as that knowledge uptake and information upload with Lazard and MVS missing those reps now? Or does it make sense to kind of bring in a guy who maybe net gives you the same production, maybe a hair better than those two guys and kind of retard their growth? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a GM.
An interesting concept of how much do you want to potentially upset the apple cart a bit and bring somebody like that in. But it should be really interesting to see if he ends up in Green Bay one way or the other. I still lean no, but crazier things have happened certainly this season. I have one more question for you. So recently, and this is obviously happening all over the place, but Shannon Sullivan after the game, apparently, he was the one covering Tyreek Hill on that play. I think he posted something about, somebody posting on Twitter that he should kill himself or things like that. Obviously, social media is a quite toxic place at times. It can be used for good as well. You played at a time where social media wasn't as prevalent. But I'm sure still, like when I make a mistake at my job, maybe 1 or 2 people know. I'm certainly not getting blasted for it on social media. Whereas players today, they make a mistake, it's affecting people's fantasy teams and their gambling and their emotional investment with the team. And of course, there's going to be a loud minority of people, who are going to be extremely vocal in a very negative way. We're certainly, thankfully, entering an era where players' mental health is becoming more and more important. But how did you deal as a player with having to deal with potentially people being upset with you and being somebody that is always on a spotlight, and how can players deal with that today?
Well, first of all, it's so I just did a podcast on this on Process to Perform. I called it ability, and it's talking about availability and reliability and what you have to be physically, mentally and emotionally ready to go all the time. That's the hardest part of the sport. This plays a lot into it. When I was playing, the worst thing at my worst, which was pretty bad, I remember I made the front page of the Wisconsin papers. You get a blurb in ESPN for not being good, and you're a couple of one of those guys put some highlights up of how bad you are, and it sucks. But the truth is, we didn't really care. Like you write something bad about me, like I may or may not hear about it. As long as the information was correct, you didn't really care.
Right.
You didn't have the feelings, but you didn't feel a way about it. The adolescent brain, this generation's mind, their brains are functionally and structurally different than they were 50 years ago because of social media, because of the larger internet. We have a harder time with long-term memory. We have a harder time with short-term focus, right? We're task switchers now, which is another way to say we can't focus on anything. Depression and anxiety have been proven scientifically to be affected severely by social media, severely by Facebook, by Twitter. And we keep feeding ourselves into it. I mean, you and I both use it. It's just, it's a medium that we have to converse in this world. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, I used to call them studio gangsters, man, people who talk tough and aren't willing to back it up when you meet them face to face. But I think from a player's perspective, you have to understand that this is sports entertainment, and it's almost like you have to put a mask on when you deal with people outside of your inner circle, because it's just like anything else. You really don't know who you can trust. And so it's almost better to, be, when I say put a mask on, you can always be genuine and genuine and show your passion and everything that kind of made you who you are and what you represent. but you have to have this filter on with everybody who is out there trying to hate on you. Because I think one of the worst things that I see now is somebody that you don't even know will say something bad or have come up with some funny meme or whatever. And then they start going back and forth. And it's such a toxic environment that you just wish somebody could go over there and like hug the player and be like, dude, and then slap him and go, dude, what are you doing? Like this guy literally does not even matter to you. I have no clue why you would let this take 1 second out of your day, but it's really tough. We don't acknowledge as a society how damaging a lot of the internet, the social media, the connectivity, the added transparency. Like if you think about Moore's law, I'm sorry, I'm nerding out a little bit, but you think about Moore's law, like transistor chips, they double the capacity every 2 years, right? And that's been true for 20, 30 years.
Sure.
Well, the human brain, the evolution of us, right? We're asking ourselves to grow and evolve at a rate from a behavioral and emotional cognitive standpoint that we can't keep up with what's going on from a technological standpoint and a connectivity and transparency standpoint. We literally can't keep up. And so we have kids, these young adults dealing with things that emotionally they're just not evolutionarily ready to deal with. And that's why we have so many sad stories now. And we have so many stories like this. It's just unfortunate.
It really is. And I actually really like the concept that you say is like your sports entertainers, right? And like one of the things that I struggle with, and I'll be, transparent about it, is like as an analyst or somebody who breaks down stuff, there's times where I have to be like, all right, well, I think it might make more sense for Green Bay to cut a Preston Smith or cut something like this, where it's like, it's easy for me to say that on paper as an analyst of something. And maybe it's even right. Maybe it's even true. Right. But at the same token, I'm not cheering for anyone to lose their job. I don't want anyone to have to, I would love for everyone on the team to go to the Hall of Fame and be paid at the top level. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. I know, the old saying as a coach, you take a job as an NFL head coach to eventually get fired. Like that's, more often than not, unless you're a Bill Belichick, you're going to probably get fired at some point. Same thing as an NFL general manager. But I think it's tough for some people to watch players on the field and see them almost as, whether it's a Madden player or whether it's as like almost like a movie character, right? Like almost as Iron Man or Captain America, and just think, well, I don't like Iron Man or Captain America. I'm not really affecting, Robert Downey Jr. But in this case, the person that you're cheering, that is entertaining you, is a real human being with a real job, with real emotions. And it does feel like there's a disconnect there sometimes. And I don't know how to fix it. I'm aware of it, and it's a struggle sometimes.
Yeah, I imagine it is. We always kind of looked at it, at least in my generation, was you knew the score going in, and unlike Charles Barkley's famous commercial, like you do know that you are a role model to the younger kids. Like you do know people are looking at you. Do know the spotlight's on you. You do know these things are happening. What we were not ready for was the speed, again, the connectivity and the technology that just allowed everyone all of a sudden to have a voice that doesn't. I mean, what's the worst thing about social media, really, if we were just being very honest about it? Your life and my life really aren't that exciting. But we can dress it up on social media to act like we're something that we're really not. And that's what, that's what people of like my generation really dislike about social media, is it's not true. It's not life.
Fake. Yeah.
And so with players, it's a kind of a double-edged sword, because right now, as a league, we're voting for the Pro Bowl on Twitter. Right now, as a society, we're using Instagram followers as a proxy for what our value is, literally monetarily. So in one sense, you can go out and play, and you can go out and indulge in all these things, and people are going to tell you how great you are because you have a lot of Twitter followers, maybe because you had a good game, or maybe a combination of both. But the minute that the dark side flips over on it, it's almost like as soon as you sign up for Twitter or Instagram, you're playing the game, man. Sorry. Yeah. If you don't like it, you can get off, and you really can, and it might cost you, but mentally, like from a mental health standpoint, you really can, because there's no way for us to police, what I put out on with my thumbs. It's really tough.
All right, I lied. I have one more quick question for you because Sam Beal was released this week, which doesn't mean much to anybody, but he was a third round supplemental pick in 2018. You were a supplemental pick in 1998, along with Jamal Williams, not the running back, the nose tackle, who had a really great career. At that time,
he was amazing.
Yeah, he really, really was. Since then, there have been numerous supplemental draft picks, and really only two. Ahmad Brooks, who had a pretty nice career, an actual former Packer a few years back, and Josh Gordon, who had a good deal of success with Cleveland before obviously some of the other stuff came into play. But there have been a lot of them, and most of them who have not turned out. You are one of the very few success stories of supplemental draft picks in the league's history. Why is that, do you feel? Why have people flamed out as supplemental draft picks, and why were you able to be successful?
Oh gosh. Well, it would be interesting to see as a percentage of draft picks
in general.
How many people do you think are good? Right. So there's 7 rounds times 32. So how many of those guys are what you would consider success stories? I don't know if the numbers would be that much different. What you usually find with supplemental draft picks is you're in the supplemental draft pick there's been some sort of controversy that's followed you for the last 6 months. Something's happened, right? So I left school. I can't remember exactly what happened to Jamal Williams. But so you end up in this situation. So you end up in this situation, and generally speaking, I think a lot of GMs would say, well, this person now has one strike against them, or has a history, or there's some tendencies or behaviors there that might suggest they're not going to be as successful, right? Depending on what those things are. So, and on the other side of that, clearly, if you have any kind of talent, they're going to give you a chance. So you have this behavioral issue that you probably have to deal with. And then you have this talent over here that is undeniable. And some GMs are willing to take risks on guys that maybe they shouldn't.
Yeah. And to your point, I guess since your year, 1998, 23 players have been picked, and you, Jamal Williams, Ahmad Brooks, and Josh Gordon are 4 of them that turned out. If you probably look at 4 out of most, 20, if you take 23 random draft picks and said 4 of them turned out, it probably is not that far off, especially when a lot of these are 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round supplemental picks and not 1st or 2nd rounders. So that's a great point. Mike, amazing stuff as always. Always appreciate it. We will absolutely talk soon. Where can we find you on Twitter, and where can we follow you?
Yeah, hit me up at Unrivaled ESS on Twitter and Process to Perform on Instagram.
Awesome. We will make sure to do so. We will talk soon. Mike, thank you as always. For those listening, make sure to subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter at Pack-A-Day Podcast. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.